I was standing in the middle of the wedding hall, surrounded by 100 glowing faces, when I realized the ground beneath my feet was about to open and swallow me whole. The chandeliers above sparkled, violins played, and a white-draped stage stood like an altar of promises. For hours I had tried to convince myself that today was about love, that despite the unease tightening my chest, my son deserved to be happy on his wedding day. But then, the master of ceremonies raised his voice into the microphone with a rehearsed smile that made my skin crawl. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "we have a very special gift to announce. Something that will ensure this couple starts their new life with prosperity and security. Tonight, the groom's mother's apartment will be auctioned as a wedding contribution, and the proceeds will become the foundation of their future together." The crowd erupted in applause. I saw hands clapping, glasses raised, and the bride glowing like a queen receiving her crown. Even my son smiled nervously, nodding as though he had just been honored with the most generous sacrifice. My stomach turned to ice. My lungs forgot how to breathe. My ears filled with the roaring ocean of betrayal. My apartment? My only home? Auctioned? For a second, I thought I must have misheard. Perhaps the music distorted his words, or perhaps stress was playing tricks on me. But no, the MC continued with confidence, holding up a glossy folder as if it were the crown jewel of the evening. "Yes, you heard correctly," he said. "A property located right in the heart of the city, generously offered for the happiness of our newlyweds. A round of applause for this extraordinary gift." The audience obeyed with enthusiasm. Strangers toasted with champagne, congratulating my son and his bride. My legs trembled. I felt the room tilt. The bride's eyes swept across the crowd and landed on me with a triumphant gleam that sliced through my heart like a blade. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied, as if the entire charade had been designed for this moment, my humiliation wrapped in white ribbons. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My tongue was dry as paper. In my mind, I saw the pale peach walls of my living room, the curtains I had sewn myself, the creaking wooden dresser I had restored on weekends when loneliness became unbearable. I saw the little balcony where I drank coffee every morning, my plants swaying in the wind like stubborn soldiers of dignity. That apartment wasn't just a place to sleep. It was 20 years of sacrifice, the only proof that I had built something for myself after decades of working in kitchens where no one remembered my name. And now, in front of 100 guests, they announced it as if it were a wedding favor, like a bottle of cheap wine handed to strangers. A sound escaped my throat, half gasp, half scream. Nobody heard over the music and applause. The MC invited the guests to prepare their bids, announcing that details of the property would be displayed on the giant screen. The screen lit up, and to my horror, there it was, photos of my apartment. My living room stripped of personality by professional angles. My bedroom, the sunlight captured as if it belonged to someone else. My kitchen, which I had scrubbed countless nights after 12-hour shifts. The words across the slide burned my eyes. Starting bid, $120,000. The bride clutched my son's hand and lifted it high like a champion boxer. He looked at her, then at the audience, then finally at me. And when our eyes met, I saw not shame, not apology, but a flicker of determination. He had known. He had agreed. He had sold me. Something broke inside me. My hands shook so violently that I spilled the champagne I had been holding. The liquid ran down my dress like cold tears. I could not breathe. My chest ached as if someone had reached inside and crushed my ribs. All the voices around me blurred into a cruel chorus. How generous! What a brilliant idea! They will start life debt-free. Generous? Brilliant? My whole existence was being stolen in plain sight, and they called it generosity? I pressed my fist against my lips, biting down to keep from screaming. But the pain was too sharp. The betrayal too raw. "Stop," I whispered, but no one heard. "Stop." I tried again, louder. A few heads turned. The MC ignored me and raised his voice further. "Let the bidding begin." My blood boiled. My body acted before my mind could. I pushed my chair back with a violent screech that cut through the music. Conversations died. The hall fell into a stunned hush. All eyes turned toward me as I staggered forward, heart pounding like a war drum. "Stop this nonsense." My voice cracked through the microphone's echo. "This house is not yours to sell." The silence that followed was deeper than any silence I had known. 100 guests froze, forks suspended over plates, glasses trembling in midair. My son's smile shattered. The bride's triumph flickered into rage. The MC's face drained of color. I stood there, shaking, but stronger than I had felt in years. I pulled a folder from my purse with trembling hands and held it high above my head. The documents inside were not copies. They were originals, title deeds, proof, evidence that this apartment, this sanctuary, belonged only to me. "You may have tried to turn my life into entertainment," I said, my voice steadying with every word, "but this roof is not a wedding prize. It is my home, the only thing I have after a lifetime of sacrifice, and you will not auction it while I still breathe." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man muttered, "What is going on?" The bride hissed something under her breath and tugged at my son's sleeve, but he stood frozen, trapped between the world he wanted and the mother he betrayed. I looked at him, my voice breaking now with the weight of memory. "Do you remember, Manny? Do you remember when you were 10 years old and you swore you'd buy me a bigger house one day so I'd never have to work double shifts again? Do you remember how you hugged me when I came home smelling of grease, promising me you'd take care of me? And now you stand here auctioning the only roof I own?" The bride stepped forward, her voice sugar dipped in venom. "Mama, Bree, don't be dramatic. This is for the good of the family. You'll still live with us. It's practical, it's logical." "Logical?" I snapped. "Is it logical to rob your own mother alive? Is it logical to treat her as an old piece of furniture to be moved at your convenience? Tell me, Lauren, what kind of family builds their foundation on theft?" The room held its breath. I felt my knees trembling, but my back straightened like steel. I turned back to the guests, scanning their shocked faces. "Would you accept this if it were your mother? If it were your home?" I demanded. "Would you clap while your life was stripped from you?" Whispers spread like wildfire. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at my son with disbelief. A woman whispered to her husband, "I thought it was her gift." Another shook his head and muttered, "This is outrageous." And in that moment, I realized the betrayal was no longer private. It was public. My humiliation was not mine alone. It had become a spectacle, a wound displayed on a stage. I had no choice but to fight, even if it meant tearing apart the very family I had spent my life trying to hold together. I clutched the deeds to my chest, my heart beating so loud it drowned out the violins. "This is not over," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the hall. "You tried to sell me like an object. You forgot that I am a person, and you will regret the day you underestimated me." The bride's face hardened. My son lowered his eyes. The MC stammered into the microphone, trying to regain control. But the air had changed. The celebration had curdled into dread. And as I stood there, trembling but unbroken, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. This was only the beginning of the war. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep. My body ached from hours of preparing food for the rehearsal dinner, but my mind was restless, haunted by whispers I could not quite decipher. When you are a mother, you learn to feel storms before they arrive. A sentence out of place, A smile that lingers too long, a door closed too quickly, those small signs accumulate into dread. I told myself I was only tired, that my son's new life would not necessarily erase me from his. But then small details began to gnaw at me, like termites chewing through the beams of a house. It started weeks earlier, when Lauren invited me for coffee at her favorite cafe. She was all sweetness that afternoon, her voice syrupy as she held my hands across the table. "Mama," she said, "Manny and I have been thinking. We want to surprise everyone at the wedding with something truly unforgettable, a gesture of unity, something that shows the family coming together." I smiled, relieved, thinking she meant a dance, a song, maybe a slideshow of childhood photos. But then she added quickly, "It's a secret, though, so don't worry if you hear people whispering. Just trust us." Her nails dug into my skin a little too sharply, and her eyes glittered with something that made me uneasy. I nodded, but deep down a warning bell rang. Another sign came when I walked into my apartment one Friday evening after a long shift. The air smelled faintly of perfume that was not mine. My dresser drawers were slightly open, my documents rearranged. At first I thought I had simply been careless until I noticed the deed to my apartment lying on top of the stack instead of hidden where I always kept it. My heart lurched. I had shown that paper to no one since the day I signed it. When I asked Manny about it later, he laughed. "Mom, you're so paranoid. Maybe you left it out yourself." But his eyes darted away too quickly, and guilt painted his face like a shadow. The most piercing wound came one evening when I overheard a phone call I was never meant to hear. Manny was in the hallway speaking in low tones, his back turned to me. "Yes, everything will be ready by the wedding," he whispered. "She won't resist. She doesn't even know what's coming." I froze by the kitchen door, holding my breath. My son's words, so cold, so calculated, cut me deeper than any knife. He was not talking about some decoration or surprise. He was talking about me, about my ignorance, about a plan I was excluded from but trapped inside. I wanted to burst out, demand answers, but cowardice held my tongue. I retreated to my bedroom and pressed my pillow against my face to stifle the sobs. Looking back now, I see how naive I was, how desperately I clung to denial. I told myself no child would truly betray their mother, not after all I had given. I had worked in kitchens since I was 15, saving every coin, wearing the same shoes until they tore, eating soup so that my son could have meat. I had believed sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. I did not understand then that entitlement is a hunger that grows sharper the more you feed it. The first public crack appeared at the bridal shower. Surrounded by Lauren's friends, women with glittering rings and designer dresses, she held up a glass of champagne and declared, "We're so lucky that Manny's mom is being incredibly generous with us. She promised we'd have a strong start." Everyone applauded, turned to me, waiting for me to nod. I smiled weakly, pretending to understand, but inside my stomach churned. I had promised no such thing. What generosity was she hinting at? My presence at that table felt like sitting in a cage made of gossip, the bars tightening with every laugh. I confided my unease to my neighbor Vincent, an old electrician who often helped me fix things in my apartment. He frowned deeply. "Fatima," he said, "I don't like the way they're circling around you. Just last week I saw your son with a real estate agent outside the building. They were pointing at your windows." My blood ran cold. "Are you sure it was my apartment?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Positive," he replied. "I've been in this neighborhood 40 years. I know when a property is being scouted." I wanted to deny it, but the pit in my stomach knew he was right. Still, I thanked him politely and went inside, too afraid to face the truth. The week of the wedding, my apartment became strangely quiet. Manny stopped visiting. Lauren no longer called. At first, I thought they were simply busy with preparations, but then I noticed something eerie. Flyers for moving companies slipped under my door, brochures for storage units, all addressed to my name. How had they appeared? Who had requested them? My hands shook as I threw them away, but the message was clear. Someone was planning a move, and it was not me. On the night of the rehearsal dinner, I finally understood the depth of my isolation. Surrounded by relatives, laughter, music, I felt like a ghost. My cousins whispered behind napkins, glancing at me with pity. A niece avoided my eyes. Even my sister-in-law leaned over and said, "Don't worry, dear, you'll be comfortable. It's better this way." Better what way? My throat closed. I wanted to demand an explanation, but the room spun with chatter and wine, and I felt small, insignificant, like a burden they were eager to unload. Back home that night, I stood in front of my window, staring at the city lights. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and asked myself, when did I become disposable? When did my sacrifices stop counting? I had thought the wedding would be a celebration of love, but now it felt like a funeral for my independence. Every detail, the secretive smiles, the whispered calls, the rearranged documents, pointed toward a betrayal too cruel to name. Yet I clung to silence, afraid that if I spoke aloud, the nightmare would become real. The morning of the wedding, as I dressed in my best outfit, my hands trembled so badly I could barely fasten the buttons. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were ringed with shadows, my mouth tight with fear. I told myself, hold your head high. You are not weak. You are not invisible. But deep inside, I feared the truth, that I was walking into an ambush disguised as a celebration. As I entered the grand hall later that day, the chandeliers glittering like 1,000 eyes, I forced a smile for the guests who greeted me. I sat quietly through the ceremony, through the speeches, through the dances, my heart pounding with dread. Every detail around me felt like a rehearsal for betrayal. The oversized screen, the microphone, the way the MC kept glancing at Lauren for cues. And when the moment finally came, when the announcement struck like a lightning bolt, I realized the signs had been there all along. I had simply refused to see them. That was the first circle of betrayal, the first ripple in the pond. And as devastating as it felt, it was only the beginning. I thought I had seen the worst of it when the MC announced my apartment as a wedding prize, but betrayal rarely strikes just once. Like waves against a shore, it returns again and again, each stronger than the last. What I discovered after those first uneasy signs was that the plan to erase me had been in motion far longer than I dared imagine. It was not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. It was an orchestration, a scheme stitched together behind my back, thread by poisonous thread. The first revelation came from Joanna, my co-worker at the restaurant. She pulled me aside one evening while we were stacking plates after closing. "Fatima," she whispered, her face pale with worry. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but I overheard something last week. Lauren came into the restaurant with a real estate agent. They didn't see me in the back. I heard them talking about how fast they could list your apartment if the paperwork was ready." My knees weakened, and I gripped the counter for balance. "My apartment?" I asked, my voice cracking. "She was pointing at the menu," Joanna continued, "but the way she said her place is perfect for a young couple just needs a bit of renovation. I knew she wasn't talking about food." I wanted to believe Joanna was mistaken, but she had no reason to lie, and the detail that broke me was the phrase, "a bit of renovation." That was exactly how Lauren had described my living room months earlier, running her manicured finger over my walls and sneering, "This color is so outdated, Mama. You really need to modernize." Days later, another clue landed directly in my mailbox, like a bullet disguised as paper. It was a letter from a bank I had never dealt with, congratulating me on the pre-approval of a home equity loan worth $50,000. I read the lines over and over, my heart pounding. The letter bore my name, but an email address I had never created. A phone number I didn't recognize. The fine print revealed a cosigner, Manny, my son, my blood. He had used my identity to apply for debt on the only property I owned. I stormed to his apartment the same night, clutching the letter like a weapon. When he opened the door, his hair was disheveled, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "What is this?" I demanded, shoving the paper in his face. He blinked, then shrugged. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Don't get worked up." My voice trembled with rage. "Paperwork? You applied for a loan in my name without telling me. You forged my information?" He rubbed his temples, sighing like a man burdened by a nagging child. "It's not forging if it's family. We were going to pay it back after the wedding. It's just temporary." His words, casual as ash, nearly drove me to collapse. "Temporary theft is still theft," I whispered. "Do you hear yourself, Manny? You talk like a stranger." He turned away, muttering, "You'll understand later. It's for the best." For the best. How many sins have been justified with that phrase? For the best of whom? Not me. Not the woman who had worked her bones raw so he could have shoes, books, and a roof. The next revelation came from an unexpected ally, a young real estate agent named Clara who lived 2 floors below me. She knocked on my door one Sunday morning, her eyes wide with hesitation. "Mrs. Jones," she said, "I don't want to interfere in your family matters, but I think you should know your son and his fiancée came to my office last month. They asked me to prepare a valuation report on your apartment. They said you were planning to downsize after the wedding." My heart sank. "Did they sign anything?" I asked, gripping the door frame to steady myself. Clara shook her head. "They wanted it discreet. But I couldn't sleep knowing you might not even be aware." Her honesty cut deeper than their lies. They had told strangers I was planning to leave, while never saying a word to me. They had drafted the future of my life as if I were already gone. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the silence heavy as stone. I pulled out an old photo album, flipping through the pages of Manny's childhood. There he was, smiling with frosting on his nose at his 5th birthday. There he was, clinging to my apron, afraid of the dark. There he was, asleep on my shoulder after his father's funeral, his small body trembling with grief. I had given everything to this boy, and now he schemed with his bride to erase me like a mistake on paper. But perhaps the cruelest revelation came from within my own family circle. My cousin Tatiana visited the week before the wedding, bringing flowers and forced cheer. We sipped tea, and halfway through the cup, she leaned forward with a pained look. "Fatima, I need to ask you something. Is it true you're giving your apartment to Manny and Lauren as a wedding gift?" My heart lurched. "Who told you that?" I demanded. Tatiana hesitated. "Manny. He told the whole family. He said you wanted to surprise everyone with your generosity." I slammed my cup onto the saucer, tea splashing. My voice shook with fury. Surprise everyone? Do I look like a woman who surprises herself with eviction? Tatiana reached for my hand, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I knew it didn't sound like you. But cousin, the family already believes him. They're praising you behind your back, calling you saintly. They're convinced you've made the ultimate sacrifice." And there it was, the trap snapping shut. They had not only prepared the papers and the auction, they had shaped the narrative. They had painted me as the willing donor, the doting mother eager to trade her dignity for applause. My silence would be taken as consent. My resistance would be branded betrayal of my own children. The weight of it pressed on me until I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to tear the lies apart with my bare hands, but my voice was drowned in a sea of gossip. In the eyes of the family, I had already agreed. In the eyes of strangers, I was already generous. Only in my own eyes was I still a prisoner screaming for escape. That week, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps of thieves. Every letter in the mailbox felt like a new betrayal waiting to be unsealed. I carried the deed to my apartment in my purse at all times, terrified it would vanish if I left it behind. At work, my hands shook so badly I burned myself on hot pans. My coworkers asked if I was sick. I smiled, lied, said I was just tired. How could I explain that the illness eating me alive was not in my body, but in my bloodline? The final nail came 2 days before the wedding. I returned home to find my key struggling in the lock. For a moment, I thought it was jammed, but when the door finally opened, I saw the truth. The lock had been tampered with. Inside, the living room bore subtle signs of intrusion. A chair moved slightly, a drawer half open, a faint scuff mark on the floor. My heart thundered as I ran to my bedroom. My safe, hidden under layers of clothes, had been opened. Inside, the emergency cash I kept, nearly $2,000, was gone. In its place was a note in handwriting I recognized instantly. "Don't worry, Mama, we'll pay you back after the wedding. Love, Manny." I collapsed onto the bed, the note crumpling in my hand. My son had not even bothered to hide his crime. He had stolen from me and left an IOU like a child taking cookies from a jar. But this was not cookies. This was my survival, my security, my last defense. As I sat there, shaking, I realized the truth with searing clarity. The wedding was not just a celebration of love. It was the climax of a heist, a stage where they would unveil my life as their property. Every guest would clap, every relative would nod, and I would stand cornered, robbed, voiceless. Unless I found the courage to fight, that was the second circle of escalation, the unveiling of secrets I was never meant to know. The whispers had become words, the shadows had become faces, and still, the worst was yet to come. If the second circle of betrayal was the discovery of their secrets, then the third was the punishment for daring to resist. Once I began asking questions, once I confronted Manny about the loan papers, once I let my face harden instead of smiling blindly, the air around me changed. The warmth of relatives cooled into frost, the laughter of neighbors faded into whispers. I was no longer the beloved mother who sacrificed. I was now the obstacle, the difficult old woman standing in the way of progress. It began at a family dinner 3 nights before the wedding. I entered the restaurant with my head high, determined to show no cracks. But the moment I sat down, I felt the weight of every eye. My sister-in-law leaned across the table and patted my hand. "Fatima, dear, we all know you mean well, but please don't make things harder than they have to be. Manny and Lauren are starting a new life. They need space, security. You'll be comfortable with them. Trust me." The others nodded in chorus. Even cousins I hadn't seen in years suddenly had opinions about what was best for me. I tried to speak, to explain that I had never agreed to give up my apartment, but the words were drowned in a sea of condescension. "Don't worry," one cousin interrupted. "Everyone thinks it's beautiful that you're so generous." Another chimed in, "It's inspiring, Fatima. Not every parent would sacrifice like that." Sacrifice. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I was not sacrificing. I was being stolen from. Yet to deny it in that moment would have made me look mad, ungrateful, even cruel. They had trapped me in a narrative where silence meant consent and protest meant betrayal. When I returned home that night, my phone was buzzing with messages. Aunts, uncles, even distant relatives wrote long paragraphs praising me for my decision. One said, "You've set such an example for us. When we're older, we hope to be as giving as you." Another wrote, "Your apartment is in good hands, don't worry. Manny and Lauren will honor you forever." Each word cut deeper because it revealed how thoroughly the lie had spread. My son had not only betrayed me, he had recruited an entire choir to sing his version of the truth. The pressure spread beyond family. At church on Sunday after service, people came up to congratulate me. "What a noble thing you're doing," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "Your son is blessed to have a mother like you." My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, "It's not true," but the words lodged in my throat. How could I humiliate myself by confessing that my own son had turned me into a victim? How could I fight an entire community that already believed the story? Even at work, whispers reached me. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing pans, I overheard two young servers talking. "Did you hear about Fatima? She's giving her place to her son. So sweet. I wish my parents were like that." I slammed a pot harder than I intended, and they glanced at me, embarrassed, as if caught gossiping. But it was too late. The rumor had already crossed from family to strangers. My reputation, once built on dignity, was now painted with false martyrdom. Manny himself began tightening the screws. He no longer visited with warmth. Instead, he came with lists. "Mom," he said one evening, standing in my living room like an inspector, "you'll need to start packing your things. After the wedding, it will be easier to move gradually." He gestured at my bookshelf. "Maybe donate some of these old books. They'll just take up space." My blood boiled. "This is my home," I snapped. "I'm not moving anywhere." He sighed, as if speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. "Mom, stop making this harder. Everyone knows you agreed. Don't embarrass yourself by changing your mind now." Those words nearly broke me. Don't embarrass yourself. It was not just pressure. It was gaslighting. He wanted me to believe my own memory was faulty, that I had indeed promised something I knew I hadn't. He wanted me to doubt my sanity so that resistance would seem like madness. Lauren's attacks were more subtle but sharper. She began calling daily, her voice dripping with concern. "Mama, are you eating enough? You sound confused. Did you remember Manny already explained everything?" She spoke as if I were a child or worse, an invalid. Once she even suggested, "Maybe we should schedule a doctor's visit. At your age, memory lapses are common." I hung up before my rage could burn me alive. But the seed was planted. They were preparing not only to steal my apartment, but to paint me as incompetent, to justify the theft with pity. The isolation grew thicker when I turned to friends for support. Joanna, my closest confidant, listened in horror as I poured out the story. "Fatima, this is abuse," she said firmly. "You have to fight back. Promise me you won't sign anything." Her loyalty gave me strength. But even she was limited. She could not stop the tide of gossip. She could not sit beside me at every family table, every church gathering, every whispered corner where I was rebranded as the saintly mother. At night, the loneliness became unbearable. I would pace my apartment, checking the locks again and again, convinced someone would barge in to claim it. I clutched the deed to my chest like a shield, whispering, "Mine, mine, mine." My reflection in the mirror frightened me. Eyes bloodshot, cheeks hollow, lips trembling. I was not just fighting thieves. I was fighting invisibility, the erasure of my voice from my own life. The breaking point came 2 nights before the wedding. I attended a small gathering at Lauren's parents' house, meant to finalize details. I arrived with a pit in my stomach, but I told myself I had to be there to hear what they were plotting. The moment I entered, conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, with the polished smiles of predators. Lauren's mother poured me tea and said sweetly, "Fatima, we just want you to know how grateful we are for your sacrifice. It's so rare to find a mother willing to give up everything for her son's happiness." Her husband chimed in, "Truly, you're setting an example for the rest of us. We promise Manny and Lauren will take good care of you." The room blurred. I set down the cup, my hands shaking. "I never agreed to give up my home," I said firmly. A silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Lauren's father leaned forward, his tone patronizing. Now, let's not play games. The paperwork is ready. Everyone knows. Don't embarrass the family." I felt the walls close in. Even Manny sat there silent, avoiding my eyes. His silence hurt more than their words. It was the silence of consent, of betrayal carved in stone. I left that house trembling, my ears ringing with their false gratitude. On the walk home, the night air felt colder than ever. I wanted to collapse on the sidewalk, to scream until the sky split open. Instead, I clenched my fists and whispered to myself, "You are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not alone." But in truth, I felt more alone than ever. By the time the wedding day arrived, I was hollow. My spirit bruised, my dignity shredded by whispers and pressure. The applause that greeted the announcement of my apartment felt like the final nail in a coffin they had built for me. And yet, deep in that coffin, a spark still glowed. Because even as they tried to bury me in lies, I knew I still had the deed, the truth, and the will to fight. That was the third circle of escalation, the suffocating isolation, the pressure to conform, the gaslighting designed to erase my voice. I nearly believed them. I nearly gave in. But something in me, some stubborn root of dignity, refused to die, and that refusal would become the seed of my rebellion. The night of the rehearsal dinner was when the last of my strength nearly broke. I had endured whispers, lies, and pressure, but nothing compared to the suffocating certainty that I was already defeated. That evening, surrounded by faces I had known my whole life, I realized that betrayal had spread like smoke, filling every corner until there was no air left for me to breathe. The restaurant glowed with warm lights, chandeliers casting golden circles over the tables. Laughter bubbled around me like champagne. Glasses clinked, silverware chimed, and yet in the middle of that joyful noise, I sat in silence, clutching my napkin as if it were the last rope keeping me tethered to sanity. Manny was across the table, laughing at some joke. Lauren leaned against him, her hand wrapped around his arm, eyes glittering with triumph. Every time I looked at her, I felt my stomach turn. She had already won, and I was the prize. Halfway through the meal, the MC stood to make an announcement. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice booming with cheer, "we will unveil something very special, a surprise that shows the true meaning of family unity." His words were greeted with thunderous applause. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering guesses, giggling like children awaiting a magician's trick. My chest tightened. I knew what the surprise was. I was the surprise. My apartment, my dignity, my life, unwrapped before them like a gift basket. Tatiana, my cousin, turned to me with a wide smile. "Fatima, you must be so proud. Manny told us you're making the ultimate gesture. Everyone will remember it forever." My throat went dry. "And what gesture is that?" I asked, though the answer was already burning in my chest. She laughed lightly. "Oh, don't be coy. We all know about the apartment." The words dropped like stones. Heads turned toward me, nodding, smiling. Their eyes filled with admiration that felt like poison. "So noble," one aunt said. "So selfless," another added. "You're an inspiration," a neighbor concluded. Their praise was daggers, each word carving deeper into my flesh. I wanted to scream, to shout that it was a lie, but the weight of their certainty crushed my voice. To deny it would make me the villain. To protest would make me ungrateful. I was trapped in a cage of their applause. I excused myself, stumbling to the bathroom. Inside the tiled room, I leaned against the sink, my breath shallow, my heart hammering. I stared at my reflection. Pale skin, trembling lips, eyes filled with terror. For the first time, I saw what they wanted me to become. A frail old woman, confused, malleable, disposable. I gripped the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. "You are not weak," I whispered to the mirror. But the woman staring back looked anything but strong. When I returned to the table, I found Lauren in my seat, chatting animatedly with a group of relatives. She waved her hand toward me, her voice dripping with mock affection. "Oh, Mama just stepped away. She's been a little overwhelmed lately. You know how it is at her age. But don't worry. After tomorrow, she won't have to worry about anything ever again." The table erupted in sympathetic laughter. "That's right," someone said. "She'll finally get to rest." Rest. The words struck me like a blow. They spoke as if I were already retired from life, as if my usefulness had expired. I sat back down, my hands shaking beneath the tablecloth. Manny avoided my eyes, his jaw tight. For a brief second, I thought I saw hesitation in him, but then he nodded at Lauren's words, sealing his complicity. That night, when I returned home, I found another blow waiting. My mailbox contained a thick envelope. Inside were brochures for senior living communities, glossy pages filled with smiling elderly people playing cards and exercising in pastel-colored gyms. A sticky note was attached in Lauren's handwriting. "Options for you, Mama. Don't worry, we'll visit often." My knees buckled. I dropped the envelope on the floor and slid down beside it, sobbing into my hands. It was no longer speculation. They had decided my fate. They had mapped my future without me, locking me in a pastel prison where I would fade quietly while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. For the first time, I considered surrender. Maybe it would be easier to let them have it, to stop fighting a war I seemed destined to lose. Maybe I was too old to resist, too tired to keep carrying the weight of my own defense. The thought terrified me, but it also tempted me. After decades of work, perhaps rest was all I had left. But then my eyes fell on the deed, lying on my coffee table, the paper worn from being handled too often. I picked it up with trembling hands, tracing the ink of my name. This was not just paper. It was proof of every hour I had spent sweating in kitchens, every burn scar on my hands, every sleepless night counting tips, every tear shed in solitude. To surrender it would be to erase myself. And yet, alone in that apartment, surrounded by the echo of their lies, I felt powerless. The day before the wedding, I received a call from Vincent, my neighbor. "Fatima," he said, his voice urgent, "I don't want to alarm you, but I saw movers outside earlier. They were asking about your unit. One of them said they were scheduled to come after the wedding." My blood ran cold. Scheduled. As if my home were already theirs. I thanked him, hung up, and collapsed onto the couch. My hands went numb, my body limp. It was over. They had already set everything in motion. Tomorrow, my apartment would be paraded as their prize. Tomorrow, I would be erased before an audience. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window until dawn, staring at the dark sky slowly turning pale. My heart felt like a stone, sinking deeper and deeper. I imagined the hall filled with clapping guests, my son smiling as my home was auctioned, Lauren glowing like a queen. I imagined myself standing there, voiceless, powerless, stripped bare. For a moment I considered not going at all, locking the door and disappearing. But fear whispered that even my absence would be twisted into consent. If I didn't stand there, they would say I had approved. By morning, my body was heavy, my mind numb. I dressed in silence, putting on the nicest clothes I owned, clothes that suddenly felt like a costume for my own execution. As I fastened the buttons, my hands shook so violently that I nearly tore the fabric. I looked in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me was a ghost, her dignity fraying, her eyes hollow. Walking into the wedding hall, I felt the weight of every eye on me. Guests smiled warmly, congratulating me, thanking me for my gift. Their words blurred into meaningless noise. I moved like an automaton, sitting in my seat, clapping when expected, smiling when required. Inside, I was already broken. Convinced that by the end of the day, everything I had built would be gone. And when the MC's voice rang out, when he declared my apartment as the surprise gift, when the screen lit up with photos of my home, I felt the last thread of my strength snap. The applause thundered, the room spun, and for a moment, I saw only darkness. I was seconds away from collapsing, from surrendering entirely, when something inside me rebelled. The humiliation, the gaslighting, the lies, they ignited a fire I thought had died. My body rose before I knew what I was doing, my voice slicing through the applause. This house is not yours to sell. But at that moment, I had no plan, no allies, no proof in my hands yet, only raw desperation. The hall went silent, hundreds of eyes piercing me. My son's face hardened, the bride's mouth curled into a sneer, and for one terrifying heartbeat, I believed I had just signed my own destruction. Because if I failed now, if my voice faltered, they would brand me insane. They would use my outburst as proof that I was unfit, unstable, senile. And then they would take everything, not just my home, but my dignity. That was the peak of the storm, the moment when I teetered on the edge of annihilation. I was one breath away from you'ing up, from letting their narratives swallow me whole. And yet, in that abyss, a spark remained. The story was not over. My war was only beginning. After the wedding hall exploded in silence at my outburst, I thought the world would collapse on top of me. 100 pairs of eyes stared as though I had grown 2 heads. Manny's lips pressed into a thin line, Lauren's painted smile cracked into fury, and the MC froze mid-sentence, his cue card shaking in his hand. For a terrifying moment, I thought I had destroyed myself, that my words would be twisted into evidence of insanity. But then something happened. A man in the back of the hall coughed loudly and said, "She's right. You can't just sell someone's house without their consent." His voice wasn't booming, but it was steady enough to ripple through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers spread. The applause that had once drowned me now dissolved into confusion. I clutched the deed in my trembling hands and raised it high. This is my apartment, my name, my signature, my sacrifice. I never agreed to give it away. My voice grew steadier with each word, anchored by fury. This is not a gift. This is a theft, and everyone here has been made a witness to it. A murmur swept the hall. People began pulling out their phones, whispering, recording. The public humiliation that Lauren had orchestrated had shifted. What was meant to be my execution had turned into a trial, and the jury was no longer on her side. I saw her face pale beneath her makeup, but Manny stepped forward, grabbing the microphone from the MC. "Mama, please," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "Don't embarrass yourself like this. Everyone knows you agreed. You just don't remember because you're stressed. You told us, remember?" His eyes pierced me, daring me to doubt my own memory. For one dizzy moment, I nearly faltered. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice I knew too well broke through. "She remembers perfectly well," Vincent called out. My neighbor, my friend, the man who had helped me fix leaky pipes and carry heavy groceries, walked toward me with determined steps. "I warned her weeks ago that I saw a realtor measuring her windows. She never agreed. She was blindsided." The guests gasped. Some clutched their pearls. Others turned to Manny and Lauren with frowns. My son's face flushed red, his jaw tightening. Lauren hissed something into his ear, but the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted in the crowd, and doubt is poison to a carefully constructed lie. That night, when the wedding finally crumbled into chaos, I returned home shaking, but alive. The battle was not won, but I had survived the ambush. I collapsed onto my couch, clutching the deed against my chest, whispering, "They will not take this from me." But surviving was not enough. I needed to fight. The next morning, I called Vincent. He answered on the first ring. "Fatima?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm here," I said, my tone steadier than I felt, "and I need help." He arrived an hour later with a folder of papers. "My brother-in-law is a lawyer," he explained. "He specializes in property disputes. I told him a little about your situation, and he said you need to prepare. They'll try again, maybe with fake documents, maybe with emotional manipulation. You need proof, dates, witnesses, records." I listened, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt a path opening before me. No longer was I drifting in darkness, waiting for the next blow. I had a weapon, the truth, sharpened by evidence. That day, I began documenting everything. I took photographs of my apartment, every corner, every piece of furniture I had bought with my sweat. I kept every note, every suspicious letter, every brochure Lauren had slipped under my door. I even recorded conversations on my old phone, hiding it in my apron pocket when Manny came by. Each word, each gesture, became ammunition. One evening, while searching through my son's old belongings stored in my closet, I found a small black notebook. At first I thought it was one of his childhood journals, filled with sketches or dreams. But when I flipped it open, my blood ran cold. Inside were notes in his handwriting. Bank, loan pre-approval, use mom's SSN, realtor, Clara, valuation, wedding, announcement, apartment gift, confirm MC. It was a blueprint of the theft written in his own hand. My knees buckled, my breath caught in my throat. But then, slowly, a grim smile spread across my face. Here was proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. The following day, I met Vincent's brother-in-law, Michael Jenkins, at his office. A man in his 50s with sharp eyes and calm authority, he flipped through the notebook and the other documents I had collected. "Mrs. Jones," he said, looking up at me, "this is enough to prove fraud and attempted identity theft. If they push further, they could face charges." His words were a balm to my wounded pride. Charges. The very thought of Manny and Lauren standing in a courtroom filled me with both sorrow and justice. But Michael was cautious. "We have to be strategic," he warned. "If you go public too soon, they'll spin the story. You need to gather allies, people who can testify, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who saw or heard suspicious activity. And you must protect your property, change your locks, secure your documents. Do not let them catch you off guard again." For the first time in months, I walked home with my head high. I had a plan. I was no longer prey. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner of rice and beans, my phone buzzed with a message from Joanna. "Be careful," it read. "I heard Lauren bragging to a friend that she'll get the apartment no matter what. She said, if Fatima won't give it willingly, we'll prove she's unfit. A doctor's note is all it takes." My stomach twisted. So that was their next move. To declare me insane, to brand me incompetent, to strip me legally. But this time, I was ready. I saved the message. I printed it out. I called my doctor and scheduled a full evaluation, demanding it be documented. The report came back clear. No cognitive decline, no dementia. Perfectly capable. I placed the papers in a folder labeled "For Court." The transformation inside me was subtle but profound. Where once I trembled at every knock on the door, I now welcomed confrontation. Where once I whispered mine in desperation, I now said it aloud with strength. This is my home. This is my life. Still, at night, when the house grew quiet, I would sometimes sit in the dark and remember Manny as a boy. His laughter when I tickled him, his tears when he scraped his knees, his whispered promise to take care of me after Robert died. The grief of losing that boy was heavier than any legal battle. But grief and dignity can coexist. I learned that the hard way. The true turning point came 1 week later. I had gone to the market when I saw Lauren across the street chatting animatedly with a stranger. She didn't notice me at first, and I caught enough of her words to understand. She was describing the renovations they planned for their apartment. I froze, rage boiling. But then, in a surge of courage, I pulled out my phone and pressed record. I crossed the street, my voice calm but sharp. "Lauren, who are you talking to?" She spun around, startled. "Oh, Mama, just a friend. We were talking about recipes." I lifted my phone slightly. "Funny," I said, "because I heard you mention knocking down my kitchen wall." Her face blanched. The man beside her looked confused, muttered an excuse, and walked away. Lauren glared at me, her mask slipping. "You can't stop this," she hissed. "We'll get that apartment one way or another." I stopped recording and slipped the phone into my purse. For the first time, she looked rattled. For the first time, I felt taller than her. That night I played the recording for Michael. He nodded, satisfied. Excellent. Keep collecting. The more they incriminate themselves, the stronger your case. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You must understand, Mrs. Jones, this isn't just about protecting your apartment. It's about protecting your dignity. If they succeed, they'll not only steal your home, they'll steal your identity. They'll define who you are to the world. Don't let them. His words burned into me like fire. Don't let them. So I didn't. I changed the locks on my doors, hiring a locksmith recommended by Vincent. I bought a small safe and stored my documents there. I began keeping a journal, documenting every call, every visit, every threat. I turned my life into evidence, each detail a brick in the fortress I was building. And slowly, I noticed something shift. The whispers that once crushed me began to falter. A neighbor who had believed Manny approached me one morning. "Fatima," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I heard what Vincent said at the wedding." "If you need me to testify, I will." At work, one of the servers who had gossiped approached with downcast eyes. "We didn't know," she murmured. "We only repeated what we heard. If you need help, we'll stand with you." The isolation began to crack. I was not alone anymore. That was the turning point. I had allies, I had evidence, I had a plan. My enemies had underestimated me, mistaking silence for weakness. They forgot that silence can also be the sound of gathering strength. The storm was still coming. The battle was far from over. But now, for the first time, I wasn't just bracing for impact. I was preparing to strike back. The night before the storm broke in public, there was one private confrontation that etched itself into my bones. I had spent days gathering evidence, stacking it like bricks around my fragile heart. The notebook with Manny's handwriting, the recorded call with Lauren, the medical report proving my sanity. I carried them like armor. But armor is only useful if you dare to stand in the line of fire, and I knew I could not wait forever for the perfect moment. It was late evening when the knock came at my door. 3 sharp raps, too familiar to be mistaken. I sat frozen on the couch, my hands clutching the folder of evidence on my lap. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But then I thought of the movers scheduled after the wedding, of the brochures for senior homes, of the envelope with my stolen cash. If I didn't face them now, they would never stop. I rose, my knees trembling, and opened the door. Manny stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, his face tense with the strain of someone used to getting his way. Behind him, Lauren leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her eyes sharp as glass. "Mama," Manny began, his voice deceptively calm, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, motioning them in. The apartment felt smaller as they entered, their presence like poison seeping into every corner. Lauren immediately began surveying the room, her gaze landing on the photographs on my shelves, the plants by the window, the old dresser I had restored. She smirked faintly as though already calculating which pieces to discard. "What is it you want?" I asked, my voice steady despite the quake in my chest. Manny exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Mama, you embarrassed us at the wedding. You made a scene in front of everyone. Do you realize how humiliating that was?" I clenched my fists. "Humiliating? You tried to sell my home as if it were a raffle prize." He waved his hand dismissively. "It wasn't like that. It was symbolic, a gesture of unity. Everyone understood it except you." Lauren stepped forward, her heels clicking on the floor. "Mama, you've been under so much stress. We know you didn't mean to lash out, but it's time to stop this nonsense. The apartment will be part of our new life. You'll live with us. You'll be comfortable. Why fight what's already decided?" I stared at her, rage bubbling in my veins. "Decided by who? Did you ask me? Did you sit with me and ask what I wanted? Or did you just take, assuming I'd stay quiet?" Lauren's smile turned sharp. "Mama, don't twist things. Families share. Families sacrifice. You should be proud that your home will build the foundation of our future." I slammed the folder onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Proud? Look at this." I yanked open the folder and spread the contents across the table: the notebook, the loan letter, the doctor's report, the recording transcript. "This is what I'm proud of. Proof of your lies, proof of your theft." Manny's face drained of color as he recognized his handwriting in the notebook. He reached for it, but I snatched it back. "Don't you dare touch it. This is evidence. You thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and hand you my life. But I've been documenting everything." His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a growl. "Mama, you don't know what you're doing. You're throwing your own son to the wolves. Do you want me in prison? Do you want my children to grow up without a father?" The guilt jabbed at me like a blade, but I refused to bleed this time. "You put yourself on that path, Manny. I didn't forge my own name for a loan. I didn't schedule movers without consent. I didn't steal money from my own mother." Lauren's mask cracked, fury spilling from her lips. "You selfish old woman! After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You'd rather see us struggle than share what you don't even need?" I turned to her, my voice icy. "What have you done for me, Lauren? Tell me. One errand when I had the flu, one fake smile at family gatherings. You've taken from me again and again, dressing it up as duty, but never once have you given. Not love, not gratitude, not respect." The room vibrated with tension. Manny slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. "Enough! You're not thinking clearly. This has gone too far. Tomorrow we'll fix this. You'll sign the papers. We'll make it official." I rose, squaring my shoulders. "No, Manny. Tomorrow, the only thing that will be official is the truth. I've spoken to a lawyer. I've secured my documents. If you try to force me, if you dare step 1 foot further into my home, I'll take you to court. And I'll win." For a moment, silence thickened the air. Manny stared at me, breathing heavily, his fists clenched. Lauren looked at him, her eyes flashing with panic. I thought he might lunge, might grab the folder and rip it apart, but instead he leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "You think this evidence will save you? You think anyone will believe an old woman over her own children? You'll end up alone, Mama, alone and pitiful, and when that happens, don't expect us to come back." The words stung, but I held his gaze. Better alone with dignity than surrounded by thieves who call themselves family. Lauren hissed, grabbing his arm. "Let's go, Manny. She's lost her mind." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I stood there, my heart pounding, my body trembling. The folder of evidence lay open on the table, the papers fluttering slightly from the draft. For a long time I stared at them, my chest tight with both fear and resolve. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering like restless stars. My hands still shook, but inside me a strange calm took root. I had faced them. I had looked betrayal in the eye and refused to flinch. Tomorrow the storm would rage in public, with witnesses and authorities. Tomorrow the battle would spill into the open. But tonight, in this small apartment they had tried to steal, I reclaimed something they could never auction away. My voice. That was Climax 1. The confrontation in private, where masks were stripped, where threats were made, and where I realized the cost of resistance. The war was not over. The fiercest clash was still to come. But for the first time, I knew I would not walk into it empty-handed. The morning of the confrontation arrived heavy with storm clouds, though the sky was clear. My heart was the one thundering, my breath the one striking like lightning. After the private clash in my apartment, I knew Manny and Lauren would not retreat. They had invested too much: lies, manipulation, pride. They would fight harder, more desperate, now that they knew I would not surrender quietly. It happened at the reception 2 days later. a follow-up gathering meant for relatives who couldn't attend the wedding ceremony. I almost didn't go, but Vincent insisted. "If you don't show up, they'll twist your absence into weakness," he said. "Better to stand in the open with the truth than let them weave lies in the shadows." He was right. So I dressed carefully, slipped my folder of evidence into my handbag, and walked into the lion's den. The hall was smaller than the wedding venue, but the air was no less suffocating. Guests mingled, sipping champagne, laughter echoing off the walls. Manny and Lauren stood near the stage, radiant in their finery, greeting guests with wide smiles that cracked when they saw me. For a heartbeat, silence rippled through the room. Then Lauren clapped her hands, her voice sugary and loud. "Mama, you came!" she exclaimed. As though my presence were a surprise gift, she swept forward, kissing my cheek with lips colder than steel. Into my ear, she whispered, "You won't win." I smiled tightly, whispering back, "We'll see." When everyone was seated, the master of ceremonies, yes, the same man from the wedding, took the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are gathered to celebrate not only the union of this couple, but also the foundation of their future. Tonight we finalize the generous gift from our beloved mother of the groom, Mrs. Jones. The apartment deed is ready for transfer." Applause erupted. Cameras lifted. Some relatives cheered loudly, their voices slicing into my heart. I could almost hear their thoughts. How noble, how selfless, what a perfect ending. Lauren glowed, Manny puffed his chest, and for a moment the narrative was theirs. I stood slowly, my knees trembling, but my back straight. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the applause. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers began. "Stop this charade. That apartment is not theirs to claim. It is mine, and it will remain mine." Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "Again?" Another whispered, "She's ruining the evening." Lauren's smile sharpened like a blade. "Mama." "Please," she said loudly, her tone dripping with condescension. "Don't confuse everyone. You promised us, remember? You wanted to give us a head start." I pulled the folder from my bag and slammed it on the table. The sound silenced the room. My hands trembled, but my voice was clear. "Promised? No. Tricked, stolen, manipulated, yes. And I have proof." Manny stepped forward, panic flickering in his eyes. "Mama, don't do this," he hissed. But it was too late. I opened the folder and began laying out the documents one by one, like cards in a deadly game. "This," I said, holding up the loan letter, "is a bank application filed in my name without my consent. Look at the co-signer, my son." Gasps rippled. I pulled out the notebook. "This is his handwriting. Plans to forge, to list, to announce. A blueprint of theft." The room buzzed with disbelief. I held up the medical evaluation, and when they realized they could not trick me, they planned to declare me insane. But here is proof from my doctor. I am of sound mind, fully competent, stronger than ever. The crowd erupted into whispers. Phones rose, recording every word. Lauren's face blanched, her perfect mask cracking. Manny's jaw clenched, his fists trembling at his sides. "This," I said finally, pulling out the transcript, "is a recording of Lauren herself, bragging that she would take the apartment by any means necessary. Would you like to hear it?" I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and her voice filled the hall. "We'll get that apartment one way or another." The effect was nuclear. Gasps turned into shouts. Relatives exchanged horrified glances. Some covered their mouths, others shook their heads. The MC stammered, unsure whether to continue. Lauren lunged forward, snatching at the phone. "You twisted my words!" she shrieked. But Vincent stepped between us, his voice booming. "Enough!" "I was there when she recorded it. I can testify. This woman has been targeted, manipulated, and nearly robbed by her own family. We all saw the public auction attempt. This is not generosity. This is abuse." The hall erupted. "Is that true?" one aunt shouted. "Manny, how could you?" Another relative demanded, "How dare you lie to us all?" The tide had shifted. The room no longer looked at me with pity or doubt. Their eyes turned to Manny and Lauren with disgust. Manny grabbed the microphone, his voice desperate. "Don't believe her. She's confused, manipulated by outsiders. She doesn't know what she's saying." I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Confused? No. Manipulated, yes. But by you. You think because I am old, I am weak. Because I am a mother, I am blind. But I see you now, Manny, not as my son, but as the man who tried to bury me alive in lies." The silence that followed was crushing. My words hung in the air like a gavel striking down. For the first time, Manny had no reply. His face twisted with shame and rage, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning. Then, from the back of the hall, Tatiana, my cousin, stood. Her voice shook but carried. "I confirm it. Manny told us weeks ago that Fatima was giving the apartment. He lied to all of us. He made us believe she agreed." Her eyes filled with tears. We were manipulated too. Another voice rose. Clara, the young realtor, stepped forward nervously. "I can confirm they came to my office to value the property. They told me Fatima wanted to sell, but it was clear she didn't know. I didn't want to get involved, but I can't stay silent anymore." The evidence was overwhelming. The hall became a courtroom, the crowd the jury, and the verdict was clear. Lauren collapsed into a chair, her face pale as death. Manny looked around desperately, seeking support, but every pair of eyes burned with condemnation. Finally, the MC lowered his microphone. I think this event is over," he muttered. Guests began filing out, shaking their heads, some muttering curses under their breath. The celebration had rotted into scandal. As the room emptied, Manny turned to me one last time, his voice low and venomous. "You've destroyed us, Mama. You'll regret this when you're alone." I met his gaze, my voice steady as steel. Better alone in dignity than surrounded by traitors. And with that, I gathered my papers, slipped them back into the folder, and walked out into the night air. My heart was heavy with grief, but lighter with justice. They had tried to bury me in public shame, but instead, they were the ones exposed under the harsh light of truth. That was climax 2, the battle in the open, the explosion of evidence, the twist that turned their lies into chains around their own necks. The war was far from finished, but for the first time, the world saw them for who they truly were. And for the first time, I walked away not as a victim, but as a survivor who had fought back. After that night, after the reception dissolved into chaos, I thought perhaps the storm would die quietly, that people would whisper for a few weeks, then forget. But betrayal is like fire. Once sparked, it does not retreat. It spreads, it leaps from one branch to another, and soon the forest is ablaze. What began as my private humiliation had become a public reckoning. The next morning, my phone would not stop buzzing. Messages poured in from relatives, neighbors, even coworkers. Some were apologies dripping with shame. "We didn't know, Fatima. Forgive us." Others were indignant, spitting fury on my behalf. "How dare they try to trick you? They should be ashamed." One message from an old friend simply said, "Stand tall. Everyone is on your side now." At church the following Sunday, I walked in with my head lowered, expecting pitying looks or whispers of gossip. Instead, the congregation fell silent as I entered. Then one by one, they began to clap, a slow, thunderous rhythm that filled the air like the beating of wings. I froze in the doorway, tears burning my eyes. A woman from the choir approached me, pressed my hands in hers, and whispered, "You taught us that dignity can't be auctioned. We are with you." Even the pastor, during his sermon, alluded to my ordeal without naming names. "Beware of wolves in families' clothing," he said, his voice booming, "and honor the ones who fought all their lives to give you shelter." My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in months: vindication. The fire spread beyond the church. A neighbor stopped me on the street. "I saw the videos online," he said. "People are talking about it everywhere. You're brave, Senora. You stood up against your own blood." His words cut and healed at the same time. Brave. I had not felt brave when I trembled in that hall, when my voice cracked, when my knees threatened to give out. But perhaps bravery is not the absence of fear. Perhaps it is speaking even when your voice shakes. One afternoon, as I was tending to the flowers on my balcony, Clara, the young realtor, arrived with a folder in her hands. "I've submitted a formal statement," she said, her face pale but resolute. "The agency knows what happened. They've flagged your property so no one can try to list it without your signature. It won't happen again." I hugged her, overwhelmed by gratitude. She had risked her career to tell the truth. She had chosen integrity over silence. Then came the police. Not in the way Manny and Lauren had once summoned them to intimidate me, but with professionalism and purpose. An officer knocked politely, introduced himself, and explained that a complaint had been filed regarding identity theft and financial fraud. "We'll need to take your statement, ma'am," he said gently, "and these documents." I handed him copies of everything: Manny's notebook, the loan letter, the recording. His eyes widened as he skimmed. "This is serious," he murmured. "They could face charges." I should have felt only triumph, but the truth is my heart cracked again. To see my son's handwriting in evidence bags, to hear the word charges, was like watching him bury himself. But grief and justice often walk hand in hand. The story did not stay contained. A local journalist, tipped off by someone at the reception, called me. At first I refused. I didn't want my life splashed across headlines. But then she said softly, "Mrs. Jones, there are many women like you. Mothers, grandmothers who are manipulated by their families, who lose everything because they're afraid to speak. Your story could protect them." Her words pierced me. I thought of Joanna drying dishes beside me, warning me that my children saw me as a piggy bank with legs. I thought of the brochures for senior homes, slipped under my door like a death sentence. And I agreed. The article was published 2 weeks later. The headline read, "Mother Fights Back: How a 67-year-old Exposed Her Own Family's Attempted Property Theft." My face stared back at me from the page, weary but unbroken. The piece described my decades of labor, my sacrifices, the ambush at the wedding, and the evidence I presented. It quoted Vincent, Clara, even Tatiana. It painted Manny and Lauren not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of betrayal. The fire leapt higher. Strangers began sending letters of support. A woman wrote, "My daughter tried to take my savings the same way. Your courage gave me the strength to say no." Another confessed, "I thought I was alone. Thank you for showing me I'm not." Each letter was a balm to my wounds, proof that my battle had become bigger than myself. But not all reactions were kind. Manny and Lauren lashed out, posting online that I was senile, manipulated, cruel. They painted me as a liar, claiming I had forgotten my own promises. Yet every time they spoke, another witness stepped forward. Joanna recounted Lauren's words at the restaurant. Vincent repeated his warning. Clara swore under oath. The more they attacked, the more the truth spread, until their voices drowned in the chorus of witnesses. The final spark came during a community meeting at the local center. I had gone quietly, expecting to sit in the back, but the organizer called me to the front. "We want you to speak," she said. "Tell your story." My knees trembled as I walked to the microphone, but when I opened my mouth, my voice was clear. I told them about the surprise auction, the forged loan, the whispers of dementia, the brochures for nursing homes. I told them how I almost surrendered, how the pressure almost silenced me, and then I told them how I fought. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, louder than anything I had ever heard. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. I stood there stunned, realizing that what began as my private hell had become a beacon. My shame had turned into a warning light for others. That was the fire. It burned through my family's lies. It spread into my community. It leapt into strangers' lives. It consumed the false narrative they tried to build, leaving only ashes and truth. And though the flames scorched me, they also purified me. For the first time, I felt not just like a survivor, but like a witness myself. Proof that dignity, once defended, can never truly be stolen. After the fire spread, after the witnesses stepped into the light, there was no way back for Manny and Lauren. What began as whispers at a wedding turned into a blaze they could not extinguish. They tried. God knows they tried. But the more they fought, the deeper they sank. The police followed through on their investigation. I was called to the station, where I sat under harsh fluorescent lights, my folder of evidence open before me. An officer slid photographs across the table, copies of the forged loan application, screenshots of Lauren's messages, the notebook with Manny's scrawled plans. "Mrs. Jones," he said, "this is a strong case. Identity theft, fraud, attempted coercion. If you choose, we can file charges." My hands trembled on the table. The thought of my son in handcuffs, of my grandchildren visiting him behind bars, made my stomach twist. But then I remembered the nights I lay awake checking the locks, the humiliation of hearing my apartment announced like a prize, the sting of being called senile. I remembered the note Manny left after stealing my savings. "Don't worry, Mama." I lifted my chin and said, "Do what the law requires." Within weeks, the community knew. Manny lost his job. No company wanted to hire a man under investigation for defrauding his own mother. Lauren's friends vanished, invitations dried up, and her social media accounts filled with angry comments. "How could you do this to your husband's mother? Shame on you. Monster." The glamorous couple who once paraded their ambitions now avoided leaving their apartment, afraid of the stares, the whispers, the condemnation. The family, too, shifted. The aunts and uncles who once pressured me into silence now kept their distance from Manny and Lauren. Some called to apologize, stumbling over words, trying to erase their earlier complicity. I listened politely, but my heart had grown steel. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. They had doubted me when I needed them most. That memory would not vanish. At church, the pastor invited me to speak again, this time to thank me for my courage. I stood at the pulpit, the congregation quiet, and said simply, "I am no hero. I am just a woman who refused to be erased, and I pray no mother has to stand where I stood." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they were no longer tears of shame. They were tears of release. The legal process dragged on as legal processes do, but the outcome was inevitable. Manny and Lauren avoided prison by agreeing to restitution and community service, but the stain on their names was permanent. They lost their apartment, their reputation, their circle of friends. And though part of me ached for the little boy Manny once was, the truth is I felt a grim justice. Actions have consequences, even for those we once cradled in our arms. As for me, my life became quieter, but also freer. I no longer jumped at every knock on the door. I no longer slept with the deed clutched in my hands. My apartment, once the battlefield, returned to being a sanctuary. I repainted the walls, choosing a warm gold that reminded me of sunsets. I replanted the balcony with new flowers, stronger, hardier, the kind that survive harsh winters. Every stroke of paint, every bloom, felt like a declaration. I am still here. This is still mine. There were lonely nights, yes. Nights when I missed the son I used to know, when I wondered if the grandchildren would ever understand. But loneliness is lighter than betrayal. Silence is kinder than lies. And the respect I earned from neighbors, from co-workers, from strangers who read my story was a new kind of family, one built not on blood but on dignity. In the end, Manny and Lauren were left with their choices, and I was left with my home. The scales of justice, heavy and cruel, had balanced. They lost what they tried to steal. I kept what I almost surrendered, and though scars remained, I could finally breathe again. That was the aftermath. Not a happy ending, but a just one. When the dust finally settled, I returned to the quiet rhythm of my life. The same apartment that had nearly been stolen from me now felt transformed, not because its walls had changed, but because I had. Each corner carried scars of the battle, but also the strength of survival. The living room where Manny once told me to start packing was now filled with fresh flowers, their colors bold and unapologetic. The balcony where I once clutched the deed in terror now held sturdy plants reaching toward the sun, unafraid of storms. Some mornings, I still wake with the memory of that auction announcement echoing in my ears. I still feel the sting of Manny's words, the weight of Lauren's lies. Betrayal leaves bruises that no court ruling can erase, but I also remember the applause of the church, the letters from strangers, the voices of witnesses who refused to stay silent. Those memories are heavier, stronger, anchoring me in dignity. I have learned something essential. Family is not defined by blood alone. Blood can betray, can wound deeper than any stranger. Family is defined by those who protect your dignity, who honor your sacrifices, who stand with you when the storm rises. By that measure, Vincent is family, Joanna is family, Clara is family. Even strangers who wrote to me, who told me my fight gave them courage, they are family too. There are still people who ask if I regret it, if I regret exposing my son, if I regret standing against my own flesh and blood. My answer is always the same. Regret is for those who remain silent while their lives are stolen. Regret is for those who surrender dignity for the illusion of peace. I have no regrets. I chose truth over lies, respect over manipulation, dignity over abuse. That choice cost me my son, but it gave me back myself. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the skyline, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. The city hummed below, unaware of my small triumph. I thought of Robert, my late husband, and whispered into the dusk. I kept it safe, our home, our dignity. I didn't let them erase us. And in that moment, I felt a strange peace, as if his spirit was sitting beside me, nodding in approval. The community still remembers. Sometimes, when I walk to the market, someone stops me. "You're the woman who fought back," they say, and I smile, not because I enjoy the recognition, but because it reminds me that my pain was not wasted. It became a warning, a story, a lesson. No one, not even family, has the right to steal your voice. And so, if you are listening to me now, if you are sitting in your own room wondering if you are crazy for resisting the pressure of those closest to you, hear me. You are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not alone. Your dignity is not a gift to be given away. It is the core of who you are. Guard it, even if it means standing alone, especially if it means standing alone. Because sometimes silence is complicity, and sometimes raising your voice, even trembling, even breaking, is the only way to reclaim your life. They tried to auction my apartment, but what they really tried to auction was my worth. They thought my silence could be sold, my old age exploited, my love manipulated. They were wrong. I walked away with the same four walls, but with something far more valuable, the knowledge that no one, not even the people I once loved most, can take away my dignity without my consent. That is my story. That is my confession. Now I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace, or would you have stood, trembling but unyielding, to defend your home and your soul? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how many others refuse to be erased. And if my story touched you, if it gave you courage, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like mine, more voices fighting to be heard. Together, we remind the world, dignity is not for sale.